Thanks for taking some time to listen to my sermon from Yom Kippur morning, 5785, October 12th, 2024. What you're listening to is a spliced recording. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties, and the people working the tech wonderfully got an audio recording a few minutes into that sermon. These first few moments or minutes are me catching up with the actual live recording. So if you notice a difference, that's what's going on. Am I a Zionist? Yeah. I'm starting with that question. I'm going right after it. That's the question I want to ask this morning with you as my witnesses. It's a pretty big question, isn't it? It's a huge question for so many reasons. It's a huge question professionally. As a rabbi in the United States in 2024, as Adam Morris, who has very personal ties to that place, as an American Jew in the 21st century. Because for all those parts of me, one of the questions I ask when I ask that question of myself is, how can I not be? As a rabbi, whose role, whose job, whose commitment is to support the spiritual life of the Jewish people, how this place is what it meant, the idea of it through history, and certainly in our contemporary construct of Judaism, is so important and so central to who we are, to how we identify, to how we organize. As Adam, who has a lot of personal skin in this game, I spent a lot of my time in that place with its people. I have family, a nephew who is in Gaza, a nephew who is in Lebanon, a nephew-in-law who's been and soon to go back. And as an American Jew in the 21st century, well, we've all been into a world where there's been nothing, most of us anyways, nothing except a Jewish state there. In 1948, in that world, which I was not born into at that time, but after I was born, there had already been a covenant made about this fundamental relationship and connection to that entity. It was a promise made by those before me, and one that I willingly, happily lived into. How is it possible to be a Jew and not a Zionist? But truth be told, that's not always been the case. In fact, the world we live in is an anomaly Jewishly in the course of Jewish history. A small percentage of Jews who have lived throughout the history of our tradition have lived in a world where there's been a sovereign Jewish state in that part of the world. I remember the first time I was exposed to the idea that Judaism and Zionism weren't necessarily the same thing. I was 12 years old, almost 13, on my first trip to the land of Israel. We were on a tour and we went through the neighborhood in Jerusalem called Mea Sharim, an ultra-Orthodox Haredi community. And as you walk through, I remember, I can still see it graffitied on a wall in Mea Shearim. Zionism and Judaism are diametrically opposed. I remember it blowing my young mind. Wait a minute. I had a teaching, an education, a family history and focus that never suggested anything like that. But then here I was in a very traditional place suggesting that they were not the same. It was explained to me that in their theological construct that only God could bring about a sovereign Jewish state. So while they lived there and enjoyed the benefits of that state, they were not necessarily Zionists or supporters of that state. Okay, I can understand that intellectually, although did not acquiesce to it emotionally and for myself. But then as I began to grow and learn, experience, and read, I came to ask that question in different ways about the relationship between Judaism and Zionism. And then as I spent more time in the land of Israel and got to know its people, all its people, not just the Jewish ones, but got to sit and meet and talk with Palestinians, I had other ideas, other perspectives that were presented to me for intellectual and emotional consideration.
Spending time with people who are Arab Christian, Arab Muslim, Palestinian refugees, Palestinian citizens, Palestinian residents. I remember a trip I took about 5 years ago in preparation and hopes of another communal trip that world events, pandemic, and wars got in the way of, where I went to Bethlehem and spent time at the Walled-Off Hotel, which is a hotel at the foot of the separation barrier in Bethlehem. It is a Banksy hotel. It is the entire hotel is a piece of art committed to telling the story of this oppression and persecution that Palestinians feel. The wall itself is a piece of art too, because it is abundant with graffiti, of people coming with messages of all kinds, of anger, of hate, of peace, of hope. I took a tour with one of the Palestinian residents in Bethlehem. And I remember as he gave the tour, he very distinctly made a difference between the Zionists and the Jews. Jews, we're good with the Jews, but the Zionists, look what they've done to us. I experienced that encounter many different ways. On one hand, I was affronted and reactive because that felt edgy and unnecessary, and the tone of the Zionists. Well, I didn't see myself as that. And yet, I couldn't dispute whatever we're naming the entity had done to this population of people. And it so dramatically, negatively hurt and harmed their lives. So am I a Zionist? You know, technically, if you look at the scope of Jewish history, it's not a new term. I mean, it is a new term. We're in this moment, and I, like many of you, I've only lived my life with buying into this and being this and identifying as this. But through the scope of Jewish history, Zionism's only about 130-ish years old. It shows up in the late 19th century. Now, there's always been a Jewish tie and draw to that land and that place. But as far as Zionism, that's a new idea. In fact, most Jews throughout history, 80 plus, maybe 85%, have lived in a world without a sovereign Jewish state in that part of the world. We are living in an anomaly. So not only is that term new, when it first started, it didn't look like what it looks like right now. When Theodor Herzl formed the Zionist Congress, there were many different Zionisms, not just the political nation-state one that has evolved and is sovereign over that land right now. There was labor Zionism, cultural Zionism, religious Zionism, that all had different approaches to being on that land, the managing of that land, and how to deal with the people who already live on that land. And before 1948, you could choose one of those Zionism if you were a contemporary Jew, or you can choose not Zionism. The history of this very synagogue is rooted in the early Reform movement. Was widely accepted to have pro-Zionists and anti-Zionists. People who leaned into the universality of Judaism, not the particular nationality. There was no stigma, there was contentious discussion and debate, I'm sure. Temple Micah was one of those places. In fact, there is Temple Micah because in the middle 50s, there's a group of families who, after 1948, weren't so ready to shift so dramatically from how they thought about Judaism as a purely universal religion towards one that was more particularistic and nationalistic. So it's hard to say what it means to be a Zionist. It's hard to identify this because it depends who's asking. Is it AIPAC or J Street? Is it Bibi or Biden? Is it those ultra-Orthodox of Mea Shearim, or is it my Palestinian tour guide at the Waldorf Hotel? There's a great Israeli contemporary thinker, you may have come across him, his name is Yuval Noah Harari, most famous for his book called Sapiens, about us, humanity. He's currently making a book tour promoting his new book, Nexus. I don't get any commissions for saying that, but that's why he's out and speaking. But I came across him reflecting on this very question: what is the nature of Zionism? In an interview as he was promoting his book. He defines it this way: Zionism is the belief, it's got three pillars to the tripod. There is a Jewish people. There is a sense of some collective of this Jewish entity, people, nation, whatever you want to call it. 2, that this Jewish entity has a right to be a Jewish people. They have a right to self-determine that. And 3rd, that this Jewish people who has this right to be a Jewish people has a connection to the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. I'm not putting that language on him. That's the language he used in the interview. That there's a connection to the land between the river and the sea. So with that, it seems to be more clear-cut how I respond to this question that I've been asking in lots of ways for many years, but more intensely and profusely this past year. Am I a Zionist? But that's not the only narrative out there. Yes, there are narratives outside our community, and they are fraught with meaning and misinformation, and maybe belong to last night's reflection on anti-Semitism. But there are those within our community who might change or narrow that definition. Harari's definition makes no note of any other people having a sense of nationhood or peoplehood, a right to self-determination, or having a connection to that land. That's possible in his definition. It seems to me that there are people who are Zionists who don't share that aspect to Harari's approach. In fact, Harari says that we are in an important moment, not just in the life of our lives and the life of this state of Israel, but in Jewish history. Which for me, until he said it, feels to me why I'm asking this question now with you on Yom Kippur morning. Because yes, it's been hard and challenging in how I am personally and professionally, but it feels bigger than that. There have been and there are continuing to be terrible things being done in our name. I am not the only one asking these type of questions. There are many more Jews than in my lifetime who have ever asked that, particularly younger ones. And in case you haven't noticed, in our own backyard, there's a movement across the world of extremists taking hold of our institutions and threatening the fundamental values that undermine those institutions. So this moment is important, but it's bigger than that. Harari compares this moment to another moment in our history, 2,000 years ago, the end of the Second Temple period. The end of the Second Temple period when the temple stood. Think about it, it was the temple. Think of its import, its focus, its emotional value to each and every Jew. And yet at the time there were extremists, more contemporarily appropriate to call them zealots, who were taking over Judaism. And as we look at the history, they led to the ruin of that Judaism. But fortunately, there were other communities who were asking hard questions like these. Am I this? What am I? What does this mean to me? Thankfully, the early rabbis were asking those questions too, or we would not be here. Because Judaism, as we know it, would not have survived as the temple was destroyed by the Romans. But the early sages conceived, challenged courageously a different way to do this. They even had the courage to question the most important pillars of that community. As you know, because I've wanted to talk about it and share with you, I've written about it, I traveled to Israel this past March with Mejdi, who I'd hoped to take those previous trips with, but never happened. Mejdi, who does worldwide trips that are multi-narrative, that go with the intent to hear all of the stories, maybe even especially ones that make you uncomfortable. At the end of the trip, we all sat for a final lunch and had the chance to go around and reflect and kind of share some pieces of our trip. In the moment, I was surprised what I said. I can't give you the exact verbiage because it wouldn't be appropriate for Yom Kippur morning. But basically, I was going around and said, this moment was great, and thanks to the guides. What I said to the guides, who were fantastic, I said, damn you. Because I don't know if I would admit it out loud or even to myself. I think I went on this trip knowing what I'd go see. I wanted that clear-cut evidence that I could stop this thing. Call it Zionism, call it my relationship to this state. I've been so frustrated, so overwhelmed. I think I wanted to go and see such terrible, awful, overwhelming truths that I could go and with a clear conscience say, I'm done. And I went and I heard awful stories and I was told challenging things. And condemn them because it didn't make me want to cut off. It didn't want to make me run away. I was inspired by the humanity, by the divinity, by the complexity. I was so upset with them because they deepened my connections, rather than made it easier to turn away. So as I stand here with you this morning and ask this question, am I a Zionist? I still struggle with how to respond. I don't struggle with the importance to ask the question, because that is what we do. That's what our ancestors did 2,000 years ago, despite the sacred cows they were asking questions about. It's still important to hold space for community to consider these things. It's important to let those people know, whatever age they are, more of a younger generation or contemporaries of mine or not, who ask those questions, that we as community welcome that. There's no litmus test to being part of this community and to ask those questions. So as I reflect on how to answer this question for you this morning, I think about our Torah portion this morning, actually. I've mentioned that I felt like I was born into this Zionist covenant, being born after 48 in a Jewish world that, has decided this is an important plank and platform. To be a Jew is to be a Zionist in the 20th and 21st century. But I'm reminded in the Torah portion that there is a larger covenant that I wasn't present for, but that I am committed to. You heard it in this morning's Torah portion. We're told of everyone who's gathered there, the wood drawers and the water jars and the wood cutters, the chieftains, everyone's there. And after that whole list of who's physically there, the text says, V'et asher einenu po imanu hayom. And even those who are not here with us are with us, part of this brit, this covenant. To be a Jew. Not to be a Zionist necessarily, but to be a Jew. And so my first response to this question this morning, am I a Zionist, is I am a Jew. And what does that mean? Well, that's where the work is. To wonder, to question, to challenge us within that context of our varied, rich wisdom tradition that celebrates this questioning and wrestling. Hell, we are the God wrestlers. We are Israel. Oh, that's where that name comes from. And as a Jew, anyone who does not welcome that wrestling, whether it's about God or Israel itself, well, then I question what it means for them not to be a Zionist, but to be a Jew. So I'd like to invite you to question with me, to wrestle with me. In November, on the 7th, 14th, and 21st of the month, those are Thursday nights, come study and learn with me about Zionism, about those early Zionists and those different kinds of ways to think about that manifestation of this Jewish self-determination and connection to the land. Come pay attention to what contemporaries of ours are saying across the spectrum about being a Zionist, a non-Zionist, or an anti-Zionist. And come spend time with me in this context, asking the questions about what it means for each of us to do this. I'll share more information with you about that. But I welcome to have those conversations, to join in that wrestling with you. And if those times don't fit, call me up. You know I'm good for a coffee, a beer, a whiskey. Sounds like this conversation needs a beer or whiskey more than coffee. but let's engage in the conversation. As I consider this response, maybe not as dramatic or clear-cut as some of you anticipated or hoped it would be, it feels right to me, at least today, to say in response to that question, am I a Zionist? To first start with, I am a Jew. I am drawn to the words written about a century ago by a man named Edmund Flagg. Edmund Flagg was a French Jew, assimilated, but kind of came back to his Judaism. Was even a Zionist in that pre-48 idea of what that may be. In writing to his grandchildren what this meant, still speaks to us and speaks to me today. So for now, my response to my question I started with, am I a Zionist, is borrowing from the words of Edmund Flagg, I am a Jew. I am a Jew because born of Israel and having lost it, I feel it revive within me, more alive than I am myself. I am a Jew because born of Israel and having found it again, I would have it live after me even more alive than it is within me. I am a Jew because the faith of Israel requires no abdication of my mind. I am a Jew because the faith of Israel asks any possible sacrifice of my soul. I am a Jew because in all places where there are tears and suffering, the Jew weeps. I am a Jew because in every age when the cry of despair is heard, the Jew hopes. I am a Jew because the message of Israel is the most ancient and the most modern. I am a Jew because Israel's promise is a universal promise. I am a Jew because for Israel the world is not finished, and humanity will complete it. I am a Jew because for Israel the human being is not yet completed. Human beings are completing themselves. I am a Jew because Israel places humanity and its unity above nations and above Israel itself. I am a Jew because above humanity, the image of the divine unity, Israel places the unity which is divine. I am a Jew. Thank you.